I didn't talk about that stuff with Regan or anything like that. Like I was so young, I didn't know how to process it. So I just put it in a box and I left it. But there was something subconsciously that made me realize that when I went into an NRL system, I realized that guys weren't talking about what was going on. It wasn't until I started the podcast and I was on a friend's podcast in Melbourne. And he's like, why'd you get involved with mental health? And I hadn't really thought about it. I was like, well, I guess it's like, was my friend Regan. And then we sort of unpicked it, like started unpicking it throughout the podcast. And I got like a bit emotional, obviously, because it was the first time like talking about it out loud. And then Regan's mum reached out. When I say put it in a box, like I didn't go to the funeral. Like I didn't do any of that. And it was like the best conversation ever, man. Like, and I also said like, I probably should have asked, do you mind if I talk about Regan like on the podcast? Like I should have asked beforehand, but I didn't know that was the like way we were going to go down it. And she's like, don't you ever apologize for that. She's like, my biggest fear was that when we lost Regan, that his name would be forgotten. So she's like, you talk about it as much as you want or as much as you can. And so ever since then, yeah, I make it a topic. So anytime we talk about that, I want to celebrate him and I want to keep his name alive.
Today's guest is a former NRL player, host of the Keegan Company podcast, a man on a mission to spread the word on mental health, inspiring stories and authentic connection. Keegan, thanks for jumping on the Elevated Athlete podcast.
Jared, thanks for having me, man.
Before we get started, I wanted to have a little bit of a surprise for you. I nearly showed you at coffee before. Take a look at that.
What have you got for me? Is that us?
That's me.
No way, man.
Trying to tackle you.
Oh, that's wild. Man, I've got a gross beard there as well. What's that? That must be under 18?
That was Darwin.
That
was a very hot game.
Man, that's so wild. Who was that? You were CCC?
Nah, CIS.
CIS, gotcha.
Yeah, you guys definitely smoked us. And that was a very hot game.
That was that's a blast from the past. That's cool to see, man.
But I was like, I think I told Boothie, I was like, I got a surprise for him at the start. I think you'll like. So
I don't know how you still have content of that, like photos from way back in the day. Man, that was like 10 years ago.
We just wrapped up the NRL Grand Final. What was your thoughts?
It was interesting. I was obviously going for the Storm, given I got a few mates playing in there with Hughesy and whatnot. But it was a cool game. Like, man, Penrith they're such a talent, right? Yeah. Like, and like to be able to do it 4 years in a row, like Luai and like Cleary's last game together, it's nice that they got the fairy tale ending. I would have liked to seen Storm get the win, but it was a cool game. Like it was a cool experience. We did a heap of stuff in the past player space over those couple of days, over the last couple of days. So I've just got my voice back actually while we're here. But it was a cool experience, man. It was really cool.
There's something to be said about discipline and simplicity. I feel like Penrith do it better than anyone, right? I feel like it's so easy to become irrational, but I don't know, their way to control their headspace and just stay the course is... It's pretty admirable.
Well, being able to control a team who controls everyone.
Yeah.
Like in the Melbourne Storm, right? Like the Melbourne Storm, they're obviously so good at what they do and they're so confident at controlling the game and aspects of the game. So you got someone like Penrith who come in and can control them. It's wild, mate.
Crazy.
They did such a good job.
Grew up on the Gold Coast?
Yep. Goldie born and bred.
Yep. How was that?
The best.
Yep.
Yeah. I had the best growing up ever. Like I grew up on the Gold Coast, got to play a bunch of different sports like surfing, surf lifesaving, water polo, played a bit of soccer. Like I got to try everything. And my parents like a very like sporty parents. So I was very fortunate. I know that I'm privileged to say that. But yeah, I had the best upbringing ever. Got to play rugby league, made some incredible friendships. Went to Palm Beach, Currumbin, again, had some incredible friendships there. So yeah, mate, Goldie was the best place to grow up.
Signed by the Broncos early. What was that like being signed so early at a young age?
It was cool, man. It was interesting because I did all my junior development at the Bronx. So Bronx were regarded as the best like junior development club. So you know, we went through with like, who was there? Like Keenan Palacia, Jaden Sewer, Paddy Carrigan, so many, Lindsay Collins, like I look at even our under 20s team and like, mate, I reckon 17 out of our 20 man roster like all went on and played grade. Like it was such an incredible space to grow up. But I remember when I was 17, so I played this game against Keebra Park. I was playing, I think, a year up maybe. And Keebra, and obviously like Keebra Palm Beach rivalry, it's this huge rivalry. And I was 17 at the time, and I think I obviously had a pretty good game. And then my manager called me and he said, Titans, I want to offer you a 4-year deal at 17. And so it's like, for me, man, like I was like my future goals, I was like, if I don't have to like know how much or like be worried about the price of fuel or the price of groceries, like then that's me, that's my rich life. Like we grew up in a very like working class family. Like we didn't like, while we got to do everything we wanted to do, we weren't wealthy by any means. So when I got a 4-year contract for pretty good cash from the Titans, I was like, oh, well, wow, like it looks like I've got to go to the Titans. Like, and it'd be cool. Like I grew up on the Gold Coast. Also tough because the Broncos had helped me so much and I was so loyal to them and I didn't want to leave. And then my manager came back to me and said, Broncos matched the offer. It's your call. And it was hard because John Cartwright was the coach at the Titans at the time. And so we had a really good relationship. Like I pretty much grew up at his house. Like we would always go to the Titans games together. Like me and Jed Cartwright, who was at the Rabbits, we would be the ball boys at the Titans. So it was hard because like I really loved the Titans hometown team, but then Broncos had invested so much time and energy into me.
Big brother as well, established.
Exactly. And to be honest, like from where I was at the time, I was like, well, I want to be at the best club, right? Yeah. And they'd obviously had so much success. Like their team at that time was like Corey Parker, Sam Thaiday, Josh Maguire.
Would have been sponsored by Nike at that point too.
Nike was sponsor. So it was such a beast of a club to be a part of. And I was just like, when I signed that deal at 17, I was just like, oh, well, this is me. Like I'm going to be an NRL player. And so it was interesting because I didn't want to talk to anyone else about like the money side of the contract side or even the length of the contract. Maybe it was just like a bit of an imposter syndrome type setup. But I remember signing that and just being like, it's sort of like that was the switch where I was just like, nah, I'm going to dial in and I want to be the best player I can. Yeah.
The photo I showed you earlier, you had a really good mate in that team that I versed and he was your teammate. The 26th of January 2015 was probably a day in reflection. It was one of the toughest days of your life. Where were you on that day?
On Australia Day?
Yeah.
Yep. I was at Jed Cartwright's house, actually. Funny what we bring up. Yeah. Oh, goosebumps. I was at Jed Cartwright's house. I remember I stayed there with one of my best mates, Jesse Blackley, Jed, and we woke up to a call from a guy by the name of Kurt DeLewis.
Yep. Bears. Plays at the Bears.
Yeah, he plays at the Bears. He also played NRL at Manly. He's an incredible player. And so me, Kurt and Regan, who you used to talk about, we were all roommates for that exact camp. Well, me and Regan were roommates and Kurt just rolled into our room all the time, man. But yeah, on Australia Day, I got a call from Kurt to let us know that we'd lost Regan to suicide that night, which was like, man, it was like the most insane call because like you never expect to get that call, yeah.
How old are you?
I was 17.
Yep.
Yeah.
That must have been pretty close to that.
18.
Yeah,
no, I was 18.
Couple
sorry.
of months after
just turned 18.
that tournament.
Yeah. So
was he in the Australian team that toured with you guys?
Yeah. So Regan was captain of that Queensland side.
Yep.
That were where we played you guys. So me and he was captain. I was vice captain. Both got picked in the Australian team. But Regan broke his ankle that tournament. So Regan couldn't go on that 6-week tour of England and France, right?
He did too.
Yeah. So we say like it's that whole thing, like the end of the carnival. They call everyone's name out of who gets picked in the Australian side. Regan's there. There's a photo of me and Regan standing next to each other, and we're so pumped. You know, we got a photo like afterwards because like he was like my best mate like in the camp, right? And so we were so pumped, and I was like, "Fuck, you got to get your ankle right." And then went through this whole thing where obviously it was like broken ankle, like couldn't couldn't go on this tour. And like, man, it was such an incredible tour. Like we got to like, mate, 6 weeks, like 4 weeks in England, 2 weeks in France. We did a week camp at the AIS beforehand. Like, and I remember getting home and he was on the Gold Coast and we were trying to catch up. And I remember, and I actually don't remember this. I think I blocked all this out. My mum told me about it after all this stuff came up with Regan. And mum's just like, yeah, I remember you wanted me to drive you to see Regan. Oh no, he wanted to catch up, but then you didn't want to catch up with him because you were worried, like, because you had such an amazing tour, you didn't want him to feel bad and upset for it, which was like, it sucks, man. Like, I fucking hate hearing that stuff, you know? And so we, he couldn't go overseas, and Regan, what we later found out was had a whole heap of like mental health struggles as well, probably a bit of undiagnosed bipolar in there as well. So he was in and out of hospital over that time with mental health issues, and then obviously committed suicide on Australia Day in 2015. 2015, which is it's wild, mate, and like it's crazy because like I talk about this, like I've spoken about Regan a fair bit now, but it's still hard. Like it's still hard to talk about. You know what I mean? And so that was kind of like my first experience to mental health, and it was hard because Regan was that guy. He's that guy, man. Like everyone loves. Like he was our captain. You know, like loved by everyone in the team. Funny, like. Girls frothed him.
It was
like,
the next big thing, wasn't he?
He was the next big thing, man. Like signed with Cowboys. Like he was gonna be that guy. Like him and Cohen Hess were like, that were like two of the best back rowers in.
Did he play 20s?
No, I don't.
No, he didn't play 20s in the end.
No, I don't think so. I think he was signed, but he was like 18 at the time.
Gotcha.
So yeah, he was like, and so it was the first time where I was just like, well, how could a guy from the outside looking in he had everything going for him, but then like we didn't know what was going on. Like I was his roommate, and I didn't know what was going on, which I find like super wild. And so that kind of, I guess, like started this whole like mental health journey, and especially in professional sports. Like that year, man, we lost like 16 players in the rugby league community to suicide.
We did, yeah. There was a young fella from Melbourne, I think it was as well, signed by Melbourne at the time.
Yeah.
There's a really cool video it came up a couple of years ago from like maybe a Div 3 soccer team in Europe, and it was like these two mates that constantly went to the game together. I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah.
And it was like there was the mate that was sort of more introverted, didn't say much.
Yeah.
And then it flipped, and then the other mate who was the real loud one didn't turn up one day, and it was him that committed suicide, or it was part of this.
Beautiful video, man. I know what you're talking about.
And it makes you really step back and realise that to not just take for granted or discredit the charismatic ones as well, because sometimes that can be a mask, right?
Yeah. Like it's not always the case, but yeah, there's a lot of the time where the guys who are those like outgoing, like fun, happy guys, like they're trying to make other people feel happy because like they've got so much darkness and hurt inside of them, right? I think that's probably seen a fair bit, man. The
2nd of September 2017. Do you remember that day?
Is that my debut?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Who were you versing?
Roosters.
How was that?
It was sick. Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, I love that day. I'll never forget that day. It's probably one of my favorite memories playing in the NRL, or like even in sport in general. I got the call up. I was at Bronx, and then I made a mid-season transfer to the Gold Coast Titans.
Full circle.
Full circle. Well, when I got the opportunity, I had a heap of injuries when I was at the Bronx. Had this thing where I really wanted to play NRL while I was still a teenager.
Yep.
I had that because Corey Parker, he debuted at 18, and then he bought his first house at 18. And so I had in my head where I was just like, well, if I can make my debut as a teenager and I buy my first house as a teenager, like maybe I'll have like half the career that he had. Like that was my internal thought process. So I put all this pressure on myself to play. Had a heap of injuries, and then I just couldn't get back on the field, man. Like had a heap of hamstring injuries, bulging discs, like the whole thing. And so midway through 2017, I got an offer from the Titans again on a 2-year deal to go back, and there was obviously like more room in the roster for them. Like the guys in front of me at Bronx, like it was stacked, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to forge a path here, which was obviously upsetting, but exciting at the same time as well. Going back to my hometown team, had a lot of mates in the team: Kane Elgey, Anthony Don, Ryan James, Kevin Proctor, like Carl Lawton, like these guys who I went to school with or who I looked up to, who were a couple of years older. So yeah, I went there. And got to make my NRL debut on the very last game of the season. I remember rolling into Sydney, and I was only supposed to play like 10 minutes. So, you're there 17, like I was a 20-year-old kid, only supposed to get 10 minutes, but we had so many injuries. I ended up playing like 50 or 60 minutes or something like that. And so it was like a learn by fire, like just go in and figure it out. Yeah. And I loved it.
Did you come off the bench?
Came off the bench. What
was the moments like sitting on the bench with that anticipation?
Yeah, I remember Jared Wallace. He was a good friend of mine. He's a good friend of mine. He was telling me, because I was very much like go. Like I was very high energy, and he's just like, man, just relax while you're on the bench. He's like, you don't want to cook yourself before going on. And so while I heard him, I didn't really listen to it because I was so excited, right? I was so pumped. And so I went out there and I was just trying to do, classic like young kid, just wanted to do everything. Jared Hargraves was on the other, like obviously the other front rower at the time. And so I made it I'm going to try and get it over Jared. Like I'm going to try and bash him. And it was good. We had some really good contests. And then afterwards, because our manager's the same, Clinton Schafosky. And Jared told Clinton, was just like, far out, it's like that young bloke was like having a fair crack today. And then I remember hearing that, I was like, oh, that's so cool, because obviously looked up to Jared. I was with him the other night actually. It was cool to see him at a reunion event. But that was he's obviously done so much in the game and been that hard man for so long. But yeah, I remember trying to get it over him, but like obviously you're not going to get it over Jared. He's like one of the greatest in the game.
So cool off the field as well, I've heard.
Nicest guy in the world, man. One of the, such a nice, genuine guy. Like he's one of the greats. And obviously doing some really, really cool things. Obviously had an amazing career and ducking overseas next year. So, man, I'll never forget that. Like I had my friends and my family, they all flew down for it. There's a photo of like all of us together after the game, and it's special, man. Yeah, it was a really special.
Coming back to the Regan conversation, was there much time after your debut or reflection about Regan? Obviously, he didn't quite get to fulfill that post your debut.
Mate, to be honest, I put that in a box. Like I didn't. It's and it's something that I regret, and I didn't talk about that stuff with Regan or anything like that. Like I didn't know. I was so young. I didn't know how to process it, so I just put it in a box and I left it. Like I didn't address it for years, man, to be honest. But there was something subconsciously that made me realize that when I went into an NRL system, I realized that guys weren't talking about what was going on. And I hated that. I really didn't like that. Obviously, like seeing what happened to Regan. And so I wanted to be that guy that my mates could talk to. So I had the opportunity to get involved with Movember. So I've been an ambassador with them for the last 7 or 8 years. Since going in there, we did Movember events. But to be honest, mate, like while that was always a theme, I never spoke about Regan. It was never a topic of conversation, purely because I didn't know how to articulate it. Mate, it wasn't until I started the podcast, to be honest, and I was on a friend's podcast in Melbourne, and he's like, "Why'd you get involved with mental health?" And then I was just like, "Well, I guess it was like," and I hadn't really thought about it. I was like, "Well, I guess it's like." Was my friend Regan. And then we sort of unpicked it, like started unpicking it throughout the podcast, and I got like a bit emotional, obviously, because it was the first time like talking about it out loud. And so but I didn't feel like I did it justice in the conversation. Like I didn't feel like I spoke about how great of a person he was, because he was so incredible. But anyway, the clip that they clipped up to put on social media as like a post-production for the podcast, it was really beautiful. Like they did it really well, and they used photos of like me and Regan together, and I really enjoyed watching it. And then Regan's mum reached out for like, and I haven't spoken, and like to be like, when I say put it in a box, like I didn't go to the funeral, like I didn't do any of that. Like I just like, I just didn't know how to deal with it.
It was your way to cope with it at a time where you probably didn't have the skills at that time to know how.
For sure. And even my mum said, this is after the fact, after I spoke, anyway, I'll circle back. But she's like, we didn't want to talk to you about it because we didn't want to make you upset. Like classic parents want what's best for you. They just didn't want to see me sad and upset. And so we didn't really talk about it. We didn't really address it. And so, yeah, Regan's mum, Angela, reached out and it was like the best conversation ever, man. Like I obviously like apologize for like not reaching out, not going to the funeral, the whole thing. She's like, don't you ever apologize for that. And I also said, like, I probably should have asked, do you mind if I talk about Regan, like on the podcast? Like I should have asked beforehand, but I didn't know that was the like way we were going to go down it. And she's like, don't you ever apologize for that. She's like, my biggest fear was that when we lost Regan, that we would, that his name would be forgotten and that he'd be like just lost, right? So she's like, you talk about him as much as you want or as much as you can. And so I love that. And so ever since then, yeah, I make it a topic. So anytime we talk about that, I want to celebrate him and I want to keep his name alive. But yeah, it wasn't, even when the question was around thinking about him afterwards. Not really, man. It wasn't until we started the podcast that it started becoming a bit more of a topic.
Yeah, that's really cool. Coming back to your football career, round 14, 2018 against the Rabbitohs. Do you remember that game?
What year was that?
2018.
18. I'm not sure. You have to remind me.
How should I frame this? Talk to me about some of the moments in the sin bin. Did you spend some time in the sin bin?
Yeah. Was that the double?
Yeah, the double.
Yeah, I got sent off twice. It's funny. I don't have many highlights in my career, man, but that's always one that gets brought up. Yeah, man. It was I was an aggressive player. Like I won't shy away from that. As you probably know, in that tournament that we played against each other, I was not a nice person to play against. But I was just competitive, man.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to win on everything. And to be honest, like all my coaches when I was growing up, they like encouraged that. They encouraged that aggressive nature. And obviously if I had my time back, I would have done things a little bit differently, I think. But I was such an aggressive, competitive player. And then so when people are like, oh, like sin bin twice, like it was the first time someone been sin bin twice in like fucking 20 years or whatever. And I was just like, I look back at the game and it wasn't for anything like grubby. Like people think sin bin twice, you must have like taken someone's head off or a shoulder charge or you've been a grub. And I was like, well, it was a professional foul. Like it was the third penalty in a row. And I was just unlucky in the sense that it happened twice. Yeah. And I remember coming off and I was just so angry because I felt like I let the team down. Like I think we were playing like pretty good footy at the time, and I was just being so angry. And I remember one of the coaching staff who's just like come down, just relax. I came in, and I just fucking booted this chair, like and I forgot there was cameras in the shed, and so that clip went crazy as well. That they put up. But yeah, I remember just being like so angry, not in the sense of like being sent off, but just angry in myself that I'd let the team down. Yeah. Like I hated that. Like I just wanted the team to go well. So yeah, man, it's interesting, man.
One of the things I've learned about like the sport in general, but you know, if we highlight rugby league, and there's obviously so many different positions on the field, right? And you would have heard the term probably redhead and bluehead. I think it came out of the All Blacks system. A middle forward needs to play borderline redhead. They need to do that, right? And so I feel like if we try and minimize the beast within a prop, you pull them out of their authentic game, right? So it's just having those skills to navigate that. But I wanted to talk about what was your moments like in the shed in that time did you have any stills mentally to regulate yourself? And what was it like coming back on the field after the first sin bin and then, having your second sin bin?
Yeah, it's interesting. No, I didn't have the tools. It probably wasn't until later where I started to figure out these things. Like when back then, like I would listen to like the most heaviest music. I'd be so pumped up before a game. I'd be redlining before even going out because felt like I was going to war. Like when I crossed that line, I'd be like just so aggressive and just wanted to be honest, like it's wild because I feel like I was wired a little bit differently back then, but I generally wanted to go out and hurt people on that field. And that was to my detriment, right? Like a heap of suspensions, heap of sin bins, let the team down. And I had some coaches who would try and like what you said, like keep it on the borderline. But I also had a lot of coaches encourage that as well. And so when I got sin bin for the first time, I would have been conscious of the fact of like bringing my heart rate down, don't go out and give another penalty, like just be like try and be calm. But it wasn't as hard because it wasn't a like aggressive move at all. It was just a professional foul in the end. So I didn't really have those tools. I wish I did. Like I wish I had someone like you, or I wish I had someone who could sort of articulate it in a way that I could understand.
That's so powerful what you just said, articulation.
Yeah.
I think that is so, so powerful because I feel like there's the stills, but there's the delivery and the message of how the still is actually practically applied to the athlete.
Yes.
And I feel like mindfulness, mental skills can be somewhat seen as woo-woo, but you just nail it on the head. It's because I feel like the practicality gap is hard for it to be comprehended in a way for the athlete to go, light bulb moment, made sense.
Yeah. Well, because I imagine you probably work with a lot of forwards as well who probably need to find that line between blue head and red head and being that tough, aggressive player, but knowing when to turn it back. What do you talk to these crew about?
Well, it was interesting. So I spent a bit of time with Jaden Sewer 2 years ago, doing a bit of work with him 2 seasons ago. Season 1 just passed, obviously, and then the year before. But then I had Nico. And so I learned with Jaden that I learned early on with him that my approach with him had to be different to my approach with Nico.
Yeah.
If you think of Nico, he's like a chess player.
Yeah.
Moving the pieces around, the chessboard.
Yeah.
Where a forward is pretty... they're not one-dimensional, but in their vision and what they're focusing on, it's fairly one-dimensional.
Sure.
And so, I really did learn that, like, you don't want to take away from the beast. One of the players, we did a little bit of work with a guy up in Newcastle this year who's a prop, and I realised, like, you need to play with that aggression. You don't want to tame that aggression. And so it all just comes back to, like, okay, how do we manipulate momentum when we don't have it? What can we do when frustration does present itself? But you're coming back to your point around articulation. Like, it's so powerful that you do say that because there's such an opportunity for athletes to explore the mental skills and mindfulness space. But comprehension is one thing, right? And, I just found that to be really cool because I feel like that is a catalyst. I think if athletes are more understanding of how it can help them.
Yeah.
And I think mindfulness, and I want to get your perspective on this, being in the space as well and having many conversations, I think mindfulness and mental skills has a little connotation to like therapy. Still, there's like, it's closely correlated in the sense that I feel like a lot of athletes, it's natural to get a little bit of a wall up because you might feel like vulnerability is on the other side of it, which it doesn't need to be. Like, obviously, we want to help the athlete behind the human behind the athlete, and the more vulnerable we can get around some other stuff, great, perfect. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I spoke about it before that. I did sort of learn a few more things like as I progressed in my career. Like I reckon my last maybe 2 years, I started doing more like mindfulness stuff, a bit more meditation, a bit more like being more neutral before I went out on the field. So my head banging music turned into a lot of like more cruisier music, things that would keep me like more neutral. Like I didn't want to go out into a field having used so much energy already, and because that's what I meant. Like I was playing large minutes at the time. Or when I started to play in large minutes, like I need to conserve as much energy as possible. So I don't want to waste that energy in the sheds before the game. So I'd just be cruising. I remember when I was at Para my last year, I'd be relaxed, man. I'd cruise, I'd have like a little, I'd do a heap of like a box breathing. So I'd really try and slow myself down before going out. I'd close my eyes. I remember sitting in the shed, I'd do some like coordination stuff with the ball in the sheds just to get the touch. And then I would go down, I'd like slow my breathing down, and then I would visualize like little things that I would do in the game, whether it's like running a certain line or passing a certain way or the type of tackle that I want to do off the kickoff. But it was all like very
process driven.
It was all very process driven, but I could actually see it happening. And I think it made sense because like I was in such a calm state. But don't get me wrong, like when I crossed that line, you just naturally still have that dog in you. Like like that's something that I couldn't turn off. But I thought it was really great because I could go out, and to be honest, I was a lot more clearer on the field. Like I wasn't so like, yes, I wanted to bash people, and yes, I still wanted to be aggressive, but it was a lot more like thought process driven. Yeah. So even when I was just like, I don't need to make tackle. Like if I can get back into the line, get a rest, or even if we're in between sets, like slow your breathing down. I was a lot more clear with that.
Were you still effective in the tacklers?
More.
Okay, that's cool.
More so.
Because I think there's an element, and being in the middle, do you think there's an element of fear by being a little bit more of a zen, a zen forward versus an erratic forward? Do you reckon there's an element of fear there that forwards maybe, fear losing that?
I think so, but I think it'd just be an uneducated guess.
Yeah.
I don't think that would be the case, because if you would have told me when I was a 17-year-old kid, like, man, you should like meditate and cruise before a game, I'd be like, I was like, what do you mean? I was like, there's no way. Like, I want to be like the most aggressive, like best player I can be. It's like, that's not going to help me. But it wasn't until I actually started, and you're not going to know until like you've done it yourself, right? Live this experience. Like you could have told me, but it just wouldn't have worked. The only probably way that I might have listened if I had someone who was like a leader in the team, or someone who I wanted to play like was doing stuff like that. Like to be honest, that's part of the reason why like I want to study psychology and do more in this space, especially in the mental health space, because it's like, I didn't have anyone who had played professional sport, but then also had a foundation in psychology. I was like, I would have made so many less mistakes if I had someone like that who I looked up to, right? And so now I'm like, oh, well, like I want to be that guy. Like I want to be able to help mates transition out of professional sport and help them with other things as well. The positive psychology really excites me as well. So it's like, what are the good things that we can be doing? I love the mindfulness piece. I love the fact of like being in tune with your identity. Like these are all themes that I've heard you talk about, which I really like, and probably part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast, to be honest. But it is interesting. Like I wouldn't have listened to someone back then unless they had already done it.
And it comes back to your point about the practicality. I think like building trust with athletes over time is a key piece. They need to see the practicalness first, and as you build that relationship up, that vulnerability piece opens up.
And it needs to work as well.
It needs to work. It's a results driven business.
And people are going to be different, right? Like there's going to be some things that aren't going to respond well with other people, which is so fine. But like try different things. Like try and add tools to your tool belt. Like I think every player in the NRL, like they want to be the best they can be, right? And so there's a lot of guys who are looking for certain ways to do things, where like some might be good, some might be bad, but if it works for them, then sure, if it works. And then when I was starting having positive success on the field, when I was being a bit more neutral, I was being a bit more clear-headed, I was still having positive results on the field. I was still being aggressive, but I was executing at a much higher rate. And to be honest, I probably wasn't getting sent off as much either.
That's
cool.
Know
what I mean?
You moved to Para in 2021, and I wanted to dive into how you talked about that positive transition after sport. Yeah. You retire later that year. What were those months previous before making that call? Talk to me about, if you don't mind sharing, when you're driving by yourself, when you're by yourself in those isolating times, maybe in your bedroom. What were those moments like?
When I was retired,
leading up to retirement, and you know the thought that it might be coming.
Yeah, so I was medically retired.
Yep.
I didn't know I was going to be medically retired, to be honest. I had a couple more years left at Para. I was medically retired with concussion, so I had a fair few head knocks. I had 12 months off in 2019 when I was at the Titans. With concussion, came back, played the whole next season, wanted to be part of a successful club. Para had just played in the semi-final that year. They had a really good roster. Junior Polo, Regan Campbell-Gillard, some incredible players. And I was like, well, if I can make that team and have positive success, and that's going to make me a better player. Went to Parramatta. Same thing, was in and out of first grade. I think I might have played 10 or 11 games that season because it was a hard team to make, and I was conscious of that, and I just knew I had to do the work, right? But I had a heap of head knocks. I had 3 big ones. The last one being against Tavita Pangai in round 26, the last round of the competition. So to answer your question, I wasn't really thinking about retirement in the lead up. My thought process was that I'm going to play till I'm 30.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I wanted to have the dream career of going out on my own terms and playing Origin and playing Australia, and those were things that I wanted to do, and I hadn't ticked them off yet. And so while I was excited about things outside of sport, I was doing a Bachelor of Business, I was halfway through an MBA at the time. I did that with Ryan James. Curious about a lot of different things outside of footy. I tried so many different jobs on my days off, just because I was like, oh, well, retirement's going to come one day. I want to be prepped for that at some stage. But the process was I had my last head knock. It was my 3rd big concussion of the season, and when you have 3 concussions, you have to go do the whole independent neurologist, and you have to do all the testing, and we were playing semis, right? So I knew that I wouldn't be able to play the next week because I was fully out. It was a big one. So I know I wouldn't play that week, and then the boys end up getting knocked out in the semi-final. So it was the end of the season. Everyone just goes off and does their own thing, but those symptoms kept sticking around. My symptoms were I had a headache for 6 weeks afterwards. That last one, I was really irritable. Or I would be on cloud 9 and then just be hit by a truck, right? I was fatigued. I couldn't train. That was a big thing. Even in that next week, I tried to do a recovery run. We do 100-meter returns, but slow, super slow. And I remember I would do a couple, and then I'd be oh, my head's thumping, and then I would just go and sleep all afternoon, right? And so conversations with the neurologist, and we sort of had a pretty frank conversation, and he's like, mate, you're at the point where you've had quite a few concussions. He's like, you've got a lot going for you outside of rugby league. He's like, I recommend that you should medically retire from footy. And I was thinking, that's not my narrative. I was like, that's not what I wanted to do. I thought that I would be playing forever. I thought I wanted to play Origin, I wanted to do all these things, and I processed it, and I had some really frank conversations with my partner at the time, with my family, and I came to the realization pretty quickly that I wanted to be good long term. I wanted to be able to articulate my thoughts. I want to be clear. I want to be a good dad one day. And I was like, well, I don't think if I keep getting all these head knocks, or even take your brain away from it, even just your body. Yeah. I was just like, well, is this going to help me for what I want to do down the track? And so I was just like, nah, I want to be good when I'm 50, 60 and 70, right? So I agreed. I agreed with the neurologist, finished up and medically retired at 24.
You said the neurologist said you had a lot going for you away from football. Talk to me about the 12 months following retirement. How was that transition? Dr. Adam Fraser wrote a book called Strive, an Australian guy, and he wrote a book primarily about Olympians, and worked hard for 4 years and then fall out of routine. Being an NRL player, there's so much structure and routine. Talk to me about the 12 months after that.
Well, I think when I immediately retired, I was excited that I didn't have to do a preseason. To be honest, mate, I was I was excited that I didn't have to do a preseason. So that was it. But no, from my mind frame, I don't know if this was learnt through footy, or I don't know where I learnt this or where I picked it up, but I was never I can't change what's happened, right? And kicking stones isn't going to help me at all, right? So So I couldn't kick stones. Like, what was I going to do? Like how is being upset and I guess like kicking stones with the medical retirement, how's it going to help me long term? Yep. So I flipped that pretty quickly, to be honest. And I was like, well, what's next? Like, what do I want to do? I remember I did a walk in Portugal. It's called the Camino de Santiago. It's like a 10-day, 12-day walk through Portugal and Spain. It was like 330 Ks, and you just walk with your own thoughts for like,
so cool.
And so, yeah, it was sick, man. And so those 12 months post-retirement, when you get medically retired, you get your contract paid out. So I was lucky financially. I had a year breathing room to figure out what I wanted to do. When I was playing, I tried all these different things like plastering and landscape labouring and mortgage brokering and restaurants and cafe. I tried all that. And when I finished up, while I didn't know what I wanted to do exactly, I knew of everything that I didn't want to do. And that helped me heaps.
Man, that's so powerful, eh?
That like
the anti-vision is almost more powerful than the vision. That's
what I tell everyone. Like even like working with past players now, like, or even talking to mates, I was like, knowing what you don't want to do is just as important as knowing what you want to do, man. And so anyway, I did this walk and I sort of come to this realization that like I want to help people, but I didn't know what that looked like. And I didn't know if it was in the mental health space. I didn't know where it was going to be. And I feel like I've taken that epiphany now where I was just like, if I can help people and make genuine change, but then also like make a living out of it, that's where I want to sit. Like that's the golden circle. And so when I finished up, I started working for a disability support service in Whatability. And it was amazing. My friend, Steve Dresler, founded the company like 5 years ago now. And I was obviously following him on socials, and we just caught up for a coffee, real random, one of those things. And he's just like, what are you going to do now? And I was like, I'm not sure. Like I applied for the firefighters. I was still trying to finish my MBA. And I was just like, I'll probably go down this track and see where I end up. Like I like the idea of building business and something like that. I want to help people. I'm not sure what that's going to look like. Got a bit of time with the payout and whatnot. I had the year. And he's like, well, come do a day with us with a participant. Like, and come see if you like it. And I did. And I had the best day ever. Like I went out with this kid who I won't say his name, but he was it was actually tricky because he sat on the real far end. Like he was real extreme, real complex participant, really struggled with process. So if he couldn't quite figure out what he was doing, he would get really dysregulated and kick and punch and scream and fight and do the whole thing. But I went out with this super like experienced support worker, and I went in, and it was just like, it was an eye-opening experience, man, to be honest. Like I remember sitting with this kid, we're in the car and we're trying to get him out of the car, and it was easy. It was something like, we were like out of car, unbuckle seatbelt, out of car and iPad. And we used the iPad as like a reward for him, but he couldn't quite figure out to like the seatbelt goes first, then we get out of the car. So he was kicked off for like 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And I'm like with the senior support worker who is incredible. And I was like, mate, what do you want me to do? Like, do you need, like, what do you need? She's like, mate, just relax. Like, we'll be fine. And then he ended up wetting himself, huge, super hysterical. We ended up getting him out of the car, calming him down, showered him up, got him dressed. And then he gave us like this huge hug as a way of like saying thank you. Like he knew that we were trying to help, but he just couldn't quite figure it out. And after that, I was like, oh my God, like this is like, I remember getting goosebumps and thinking like, I love this. That we have the chance to make, to really make genuine impact in this space. And Whatability, they employ a lot of part-time and full-time athletes as support workers. So I just worked as a support worker just for fun, something to do. I love the fact of giving back. And then they asked me to, I guess like build and develop like an athlete program for them.
That's really cool.
And so that was kind of my way of like, oh, well, I get to be a part of sport, but then I also really get to help people.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I love this. And so we started in Sydney, and we had some incredible athletes come on, like the Travojevic came on board, Maddie Proud, Lauren Cheadle. These are the crew in like netball and cricket. Angus Bell from the Wallabies, like had all these amazing people. And these were like the high end athletes who are not doing this for money, for a job. They just do it because they love it. but then also like the part-time athletes who needed flexible employment around their training. So think NRLW, AFLW players, development players who aren't getting paid enough, but they still need that flexible employment. So we started in Sydney and then we launched like all of Australia. So we went Gold Coast and Brisbane and Melbourne and Perth. And so that was a really cool thing to be a part of. And I think that really helped my transition out because I had a purpose. I had something that I was developing myself. And so when people ask me, they're like, oh, well, like, did you struggle coming out of it? And I think like we're always going to struggle. Like naturally there's a mourning period. But what helped me is that I found something that I really wanted to do and it gave me purpose. And I was just like, well, that's got to be the golden key to like a successful transition out.
A couple of things when you were speaking then, you obviously had the payout and then throughout your career you were trialing different things. But you said you went to Portugal. I can only imagine retiring how much naturally the fear of needing a job and that security can take over us and then we can maybe dive into something head first.
Yeah.
What role did solitude play in taking that time away help you develop and craft your values and your identity to then actually fall into that? And how important is that space from going balls deep into something for so long and then looking at your next phase of life? What did that space offer between?
It just gave me a time to think about what I really wanted to do, like my values, Like I think that, and I was fortunate enough to have that time. Like I know there's a lot of guys who don't have that time. They might have to go straight into the mines because you got to put food on the table, right? I recognize that I'm privileged in that sense. Like but that walk and that time, like I didn't want to listen to music when I was walking. I didn't want to listen to podcasts. I just wanted to walk and be and obviously knock around with cool people. Like a lot of people do that walk as well. But it was a really good chance just to give my space to like reflect on the last 8-10 years of being in sport. But then also figure out what I want to do. Like what really matters to me. Like anything I'm doing now, I want to be doing for the next 10, 20 years. Like I don't want to be sitting in the space that that just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know if that makes sense, but that time to just actually just be and really think about it. And to be honest, mate, when you're walking with your own thoughts for 10, 12 hours a day, like there's nowhere to hide. Like you just go through all the little nooks and crannies and you think about it and you think about everything. You go through
shit, that actually impacted me. I didn't realize it did.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. So that's why people do that walk, man. So I'm a huge fan of that. But yeah, it allowed me to figure out what I really want to do, which is helping people. Like I remember reading Ray Dalio's book, Principles. Incredible book, man. Like one of my favorites. I kind of want to read it again now. But there was this one. There's this one page in the book. It's this whole script. I can show you afterwards to my notes. It's really cool. But he talks about meaningful work and meaningful relationship. He's like, once you hit like a certain amount of income, he's like, no more amount of income is going to make you any more happy. And so I obviously realized that. And don't get me wrong, like I'm an ambitious guy. Like I want to build brand. I want to have a really great life. I want to give my kids a really great life when I have them one day. So I'm still ambitious, but I want to do it in a way where I can actually like genuinely make change. And when I read this page where it was like meaningful work and meaningful relationships, it kind of took the financial piece out of it. And I was just like, well, like if that stuff's important, like that'll just come later. And so it was like, well, that meaningful work is like, it's helping people. So anything I do now, like with the podcast, with the RLPA, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in the past player space, studying psychology, like that's all meaningful work for me. And then when you tie in meaningful relationships, it's like, okay, well, I've made so many amazing relationships in rugby league and in that footy world. But then it's like, how do we help other people? And then when I was with Whatability, I was exposed to all these other athletes. And obviously sport's such a small world, and you can start like making a difference with like your energy and building people up. Like we had Chloe Malloy on the podcast yesterday. We filmed a podcast actually in this studio, in this setup. And she just did her ACL. Like she's like, you actually got me at a really vulnerable time. I'm actually really doing it tough right now. But she messaged me afterwards. She's like, I love you. Like your energy actually, like it really filled me up. And so it's like, why can't we do that? Yeah. Like when you think of something nice about someone, why can't you just like tell them that? Or even like Ali Day professional Ironman back on the Gold Coast, one of the great men. He did a podcast with him, and he talked about when he thinks something nice about someone, he'll just say it.
Yeah.
Like, how many times do we see someone and be like, mate, you mate, geez, you're looking good. You've been training hard, or whatever it could be, or like whatever it is. Like, why don't we say that? Because that's actually really going to like lighten people up and change their whole day.
It's so hard for us to be seen truly who we are, because we put ourselves on the chopping block of being judged, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like we naturally hold back, but there's so much beauty that lies on the other side of just being courageous and saying what you think in those moments.
I don't think why can't we do that? Yeah.
From a practical standpoint, two things you said, and I want to get sort of your confirmation on it. If there's athletes listening to this right now and looking at transitioning, two things that really, or three things was an anti-vision. Like sitting down and just asking yourself, what don't I want my life to look like? Do you feel like that was a practical thing that can be done?
Huge. Yeah. Well, that was single-handedly the best thing that I did when I was in footy.
Yeah. Was
trialing different things. But it was things that I thought I might want to do.
Yeah.
Like, I like food. I might want to own a restaurant and cafe one day. I went in there, realized how hard it was. I was like, that's not it, you know, like respectfully. And then I was like, I love property. You know, property might be something I want to get interested. So I want to buy property. So I went and did work for a mortgage broker because I wanted to learn the intricacies of it. And then I realized, oh, that's cool, good knowledge, like great life experience, but I don't want to do that. Like, and I was like, oh, well, like building construction, like my old man's a like fitter and turner, like maybe that's something I want to do. I did a day landscape labouring, and I was like, that's definitely not it. That's way too hard. So it was like all these little things that you figure out like what you might want to do, try it. And again, fortunate enough that like I'm in a very privileged position where a lot of mates are in these industries, or employers might want to get people who are in professional sport like a chance, like because it's good for them. So I recognize that. But it was cool. Like I could just trial it out, realize I didn't want to do, but that anti-vision of like, I tried all these things, right? And finish up, well, I know, well, that's a tough, tick them all off, right? Or on the other hand, you might try one and you'd be like, I love this. Like this is something that I really want to do, which is cool, man.
And then when you find that, I feel like you labeled it before, like broadening the lens and having like an infinite game approach. It's like, okay, what could this look like in 20 years if I was still doing it? And what can I see myself doing for a long time? Yeah. I feel like that's a nice little question or journal prompt that allows us to really value. If you're not aware of your values or your passions, I feel like just by focusing on that alone, they seep through that.
It's such I love that piece. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. But and it's the cliche where it's like it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
Yeah.
But like really think about that for a second, because like time's gonna go, like no matter what you're doing. So why not enjoy what you're doing? Like, don't get me wrong, like I'm more busy now than any time. Like people, like even rugby league players, like they're like, I've got no time. And I'm like, mate, you've got every second day off pretty much. Like if you're like, I was like, you've got more time now. Like even some players are like, oh, I can't wait to have my partner back after they finish footy. I was like, respectfully, like they're going to be way probably more, because like you've got to work full time. Then you also want to get your training in. Like training's still a huge like piece of the puzzle. Like for a lot of guys, you want to get your social life stuff in. Like for me, put like a business with the Keegan and Company podcast on there, plus like studying part-time. So it's just like, where do you find that time? And I reckon like I don't have a partner, I don't have kids, I don't have a dog, like I don't have anything. So I'm being very selfish because I want to set myself up and have the ability to make genuine change now. I think that's super important. But I'm like, everything I'm doing now, I love. And to be honest, like I've never been more happier now. Like this last 12 months has been the best 12 months of my life. Like I while it was tough medically retiring from footy, I would not change anything, because I am such a better person I am now. I'm more happier, but I also feel like I'm more myself.
Yeah. You're in flow.
Brother, the flow is the best.
And and I know it's a cliche thing to say, but it's like you never work a day in your life if you do what you love. But like I would even go like one step further. It's like, it's just who you are.
Well, man, I look at someone like what you're doing. Like you look very similar. Like you seem to be doing like what you really want to do. Do you find that?
Like even just having this conversation now, like truthfully, this is the first podcast that we've done in this, but truthfully just having this conversation, it's amazing what happens when you have meaningful conversations with people, and just like thinking out loud and articulating what I'm feeling right now. It's like, this is in flow.
Yeah. And you're and it's cool that like episode 1, I didn't know this was episode 1. This is where I'm very grateful to be episode 1. But it's like you're gonna go on this whole journey of like learning, like even around like the podcast space, like how to navigate conversation. Because it's like there's a creative part to it. Like you ask me a question, I give you an answer. There's 3, 4, 5, 6 different ways you can return that.
Yeah.
And then it's also about like holding certain thoughts and being able to circle back. Someone gets off topic, how do you bring them back in? So there is like a little creative piece to it. So I love that you're going on your journey with this because it's super fun and it obviously like aligns with your values and what you want to do with your business. Yeah.
I feel like naturally, like as an athlete retiring or, you know, me moving into this podcast space, what I hear you say is having a beginner's mind.
Yeah,
starting from zero, beginner's mind, and just being willing to be the dumbest in the room and to start again, and that's okay. And if you allow yourself, you know, to have a beginner's mind, you know, there's so much possibility what you can do after your career.
There's a lot of players and there's a lot of people, myself included, where like you work so hard to like climb this mountain of professional sport, right? And when you finish, or even when you're in and you think you're going to finish, you think you're just going to jump across to the next mountain or the top of the next mountain, whether that be status, financial, fitness. Like you just think you're just going to be there. Like the minimum wage of a rugby league player, professional rugby, it's like 140,000 at the moment. Like it's a huge amount of money to come in as like a 17, 18-year-old, right? And so most of the time, you're not just going to jump across to the mountain. You need to climb back down that mountain, start again. But guess what? The second mountain that you climb, you're going to do twice as fast because you've got all the learnings and experiences that you've had from before.
Yeah.
And I heard that analogy and I was like, that makes so much sense. Like be a student. Like when I came into this like podcast game, I don't think of myself as a podcaster. Like that doesn't, I know it doesn't sit well with me, but it just doesn't feel like that's the case. But I recognize like, I've just got to start. Like, who do you think you are, like going out to interview the best like players in Australia? You know what I mean? Like you got to start from this, like you got to start small. And so we did all these things. We did a heap of interviews before we even launched the podcast, just so we were confident. And I recognize that like I really love this. Like podcasting gives me a lot of energy, especially when I get to talk to friends who are doing really well in their respected sport. But I love it. And so now we're like in conversations with the best athletes all around Australia, even ducking over to the US last month. Like that was such a cool thing. So it's interesting, man. Like it is a bit of a flow piece, and I want other mates to get to that space. You know what I mean? Like that's everything I'm doing. Like I want to be able to give them the tools to be like, they can do what they really love. But it's like also take the horse to water, but you can't force the horse to drink. Like they got to want to do it on their own.
Wrapping up the podcast and today's discussion, I wanted to ask if there was one mental skill or mindfulness practice that you had in your habits or your rituals, and you could only pick one for the rest of your life, what would it be?
That's a question, man. That's a big question. It's not really a habit, but it's something that I always fall back to. It's always going for a swim in the ocean. Yeah, like that's my go-to. I've done that since I was a kid. I do that when I'm really stressed. If I can get a swim in the morning, it sets my day up like so much. Like even we had a huge weekend with the grand final. We had a heap of events and transition workshops with the retiring class of 2024. A heap of stuff going on, and I was like feeling super like just like naturally social battery drained. It was a bit cool. It's got a heap happening at the moment. And I remember just diving in the water, like, and I remember just thinking, far out, like it's just, I don't know what it is about it, but it just brings me back, brings me back to neutral. So that's definitely the biggest one. But then we did a little breath work before this podcast, which I was very grateful for. And man, every time I do that, it's almost like the same feeling.
It's a realigning.
It does, man. And I don't do it enough, but every time I do it. I love it, but I don't know. I like having someone to like sort of not coach me through it. Maybe it's just because I'm like new and early to it. Yeah. But like I love sitting where it's just like, oh, you're halfway, like breathing out, you get in line with.
And it's nice to be led by someone every now and again, right? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that's why we have coaches and mentors. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's just nice to surrender and let go and let someone else just count you down and count you in.
Yeah, for sure, man.
like I said, this is the first episode, and I really appreciate you coming on. Really inspired by what you do, and take a lot of inspiration out of what you've done. So thank you for constantly sharing your message and the Keegan Company podcast. It's doing amazing things. So thank you,
mate. Thanks for having me, and I'm excited to see the journey that you're going on. Like, obviously, you're working with such incredible athletes, like across all different sports, especially in the NRL. So, like, I think this is just a matter of time. And I was telling you, I was just like, man, I can't wait for this podcast to kick off, because I think you're going to kill it, man. You'll do really well.